like you to put your hand up if you've only been connected with this subject since the millennia change, like in the last 2 or 3 years. Who's reading you? Who's reading you? Okay. Who got connected in the 90s? Okay. Who got connected in the 80s? Good. Who got connected in the 70s? Okay. Who got connected in the 60s?
Connected to what?
Scientology, this group, this subject, this topic. 60s, good. I got connected in the 60s. And who are the old timers who got connected in the 50s? Hey, let's give them a hand. And next question is, who here actually has met LRH? Who met LRH? Firstly, fantastic. Okay, what I'm going to do is try and quickly cover the time sequence that occurred from the start of Scientology up to the point when the church went weird. And this is the word I use when some people ask me, am I still in Scientology? And I say, oh, I was in Scientology until the church went weird. And that's when I left. And anytime I tell people that, they're totally happy. And if they're not told that, I find that they still connect me to the church and they don't like that feeling. So that's the word I choose, weird. Okay, we've got a 10-second piece of tape to play. And this is LRH himself. And this is the first time he used the word Scientology in public, to the best of my knowledge. It's the first time it was on a tape, and only then did it get used. So we can have it now on.
This is a course in Scientology. That word might seem a little strange to you at the moment. It's a very beautiful combination of Greek and Latin, I'm told. But then so is psychology.
Thank you. Now, who knows when that would have been? When was that word first used? 52, exactly. So this is the first marker point on my chart. So this column is for LRH and the church. LRH, Church of Scientology. Now, I'm telling this story also from my own point of view, so the next column is going to be like my time marker. Alan Wright, AW. The last column I'm not going to talk about yet, because that's perhaps the most fascinating and the least known part that I know about. But we will get to that. So, in 52, he first uses the word Scientology. And this tape actually is fascinating. It's HCL, Hubbard College Lecture number 1. And he says we're going to do 20 days, 20 lectures over 10 days. And then he says the quote that we just had, this is a course in Scientology, and the people thought they were coming for a course in Dynetics. So they must have been quite surprised people. Is there anyone here who happened to be at that HCL? That would be amazing.
I came across Dynetics in November 1951.
Alright. Did you go to that HCL?
No, I was in Gibraltar at that time. So I went to book 1, and that was all I could do at the time.
Oh, close, very close. Okay. So we're going to leap way ahead up to 1966. If you want to know, well, there's been several lectures already today about what happened in the early years. In 1966, I connected with Scientology. That was my first auditing. 66 was the period when the clearing course was being researched and developed. And we had a great talk before, Ken was talking about that. So we had the clearing course, and then in 67, I think it was 66, 67, we developed OT3. 67, good. And then we had the Sea Org happening. So let's, when Ken, are you here? Yes. When did the Sea Org actually start, would you say? 66. 67, right. So in 1968, I was very happily living in Sydney, Australia, and this guy came from the Sea Org to give a talk at the church there, and the next thing I knew, my girlfriend and I were signed up and we were going to the Sea Org. And so in 1968, about June 68, I was on the ship with LRH. Now, this was interesting times. I was actually there at the some of the time for maybe 1 month when Ken and I were there together, but I don't think we ever really knew each other or met. And I was on the ship for 6 months, and I ended up being the staff photographer. So I got to take a lot of photographs of LRH, and some of those photos I still see in the old magazines, so that was interesting and neat and interesting times. But I had to leave the ship, and I went back to Australia and a different time cycle. So let's rule that one off there. And Ken has covered this period much better than I can anyway. Now we move forward on my time chart here to 76. In 1976, I went to Flag in Florida to have some auditing. And this was really great. And so I will make a big happy face. On the Sea Org, let's put it for me, it was like this. Some was good and some was not so good. Alright? My original auditing was fantastic. Got a happy face. And in 77, I went to Flag again. By this time, I actually joined staff in Sydney. And I went to Flag for executive training, which was also fantastic. And I had great experiences there. And from this point on, I was on staff in Sydney for 5 years as a supervisor, course supervisor. And that was mostly good, but I'm going to give it a bit of a zigzag. There were ups and downs, but basically it was pretty good. So let's fill that chart up very quickly. But now the fun starts. Okay? I seem to have a luck, one might call it, or good luck or bad luck. I was around Scientology only when the tech was good. I seemed to have an automatic feeling that when the tech was a bit odd, I would just go away, or I wouldn't have auditing. And when the auditing was good, I would be there. So I didn't do much of the OT levels. I didn't do any of the OT levels until 1982. So we have a new date, 82. And through a sequence of really good intentions and a lot of help from some good people, I went in April. I was at AOLA, Los Angeles, Advanced Org, Los Angeles, in April 82. Oh, hang on, I've missed one step. Let's back up a little bit here. Let's make a... Someone was telling us about time travel. Barry Herbin in his lecture was talking about time travel. Let's time travel backwards, 1980. So if that's okay with you, we can just shift time. Yeah, it's a real old teacher to shift time. Bill Robertson, Captain Bill, told me that in 1980 he was in Florida and LRH was already somewhere in California. And he was called, urgent rush. He had to fly to California to be with LRH. And so CPR was with LRH at this time. Now I'd heard this story from another trained CS who had the story from Bill, and then I checked it with Bill because I couldn't quite believe it, and Bill ran me through the whole story again. He said he was called to LRH, he flew Florida to Los Angeles, and then was put in a van and drove out into the desert to where LRH was. And when he got there to the house where LRH was, he was taken aside by the messengers of the people there, and they said LRH was very sick. He was in bed, he'd been in bed for days, and they didn't think he was going to live. But LRH wanted to talk to him. So they take him into a room, LRH's bedroom, and LRH is in the bed and basically asleep, and they said just wait for him to wake up. And there's a messenger in the room, in the bedroom, waiting. So LRH wakes up, didn't apparently look like he was even asleep. He said, "Hi Bill." Sends a messenger out, make sure the door is closed. He says, "Hey, would you like a drink?" And he opens a cupboard and pulls out a bottle of scotch. And they pour themselves a drink. And Bill said, "But you're meant to be sick. I was told you're dying." He says, "It's the only way I can get any rest. I cannot get any sleep or any peace unless I say I'm sick, and then they don't touch me." And then LRH said to Bill that he found that the church structure, the way it had been built up, and LRH had done a lot of it himself, it was built so much in a huge big pyramid type structure with different groups and networks in it, that he said he lost control of the group, because he would put an instruction in the top and say, "Things don't look so good in New Zealand. Please investigate to see why." And as the command or this question went down the structure, it became more and more inflated, more and more strong and vicious and attacking. Every person that went through made it worse, until by the time it reached New Zealand, they were looking for suppressive persons and evil people and so on. And the only question was, see what's happening. Doesn't look so good. And then when the information came back up, it wasn't data that LRH could work with. It was, we found the suppressive person and we threw him out. Which wasn't the idea at all. And LRH said to Bill, and Bill told me this personally, LRH said to Bill that if you don't hear from me, if you don't have a personal message from me every 6 months, then you are to consider that I am no longer in control of the organisation, and you are to leave and take your projects with you and operate them and open them outside of the church. And this was to be a personal phone call, a personal letter with a real signature on it, or an actual face-to-face meeting. And Bill got one or maybe 2 more connections with LRH after that time. And then 6 months went past, and this takes us into 81. more comm, no more communication from LRH to Bill. So 6 months went past, no message, no phone call, no communication. Bill starts to try and contact LRH, and he can't get to LRH. He gets letters back, but they're not from LRH. They're written by someone else. LRH is very busy, he can't talk to you right now, type of messages. Bill goes back on his own volition. He goes back to California and hunts for LRH. Looks for him, goes to out where he was in the desert. He looks for him all around and cannot find him. And then, just by sheer luck, he sees LRH in a room in the big center of Los Angeles. And Bill rushes up to him to sort of say, I'm looking for you. And LRH turned his back on him, saw him coming and turned his back on Bill to say, this is not the 6-month connection that I wanted you to have. This was not meant to happen. This was an accident. You should already be gone. So within the next week or so, Bill organized everything and moved out of the church, and through a lot of other activities, he started what's known as the Bronze Org, and a lot of the people here from his work. So that was 81. Let's bring 82 back. Bring 82 back into the time sequence. I do my own T-levels. Now, I'm an auditor, but I'm also an electronics engineer. And my speciality is audio, hi-fi, recording, ton studios, etc. And I've also never had any drugs. Alcohol and coffee, but I mean, I've never had LSD or marijuana or cocaine. And I filled in a survey for the filmmaking section of the Seal Group Gold Era Studios. When before I left Sydney, I filled that in, and when I arrived in Los Angeles, they wanted me. And they said at the Golden Era Studios out in the desert that LRH had thrown all the staff out who had ever had LSD because he said he couldn't trust them. And they wanted me to be in charge of the whole electronics recording section for the professional audio person, long-time Scientologist, and that I had no drugs. But I'd been on the ship before, and I hadn't been very happy on the ship. I didn't really like the situation. And after some negotiations, I actually said I would not rejoin the SEAL and do this job, but I would go and help them. And I went out there, and the place was, to use a word, the place was disgusting. It was horrible. And they didn't need me anyway, because the whole base was assigned a low condition, and they were all just doing work, cleaning, painting, fixing the gun. They didn't need me. It was just simply someone needed to hire someone, they needed a statistic, and they got me. So, to put this in as a marker, Golden Era Studios, that was a big sad face. I asked people there when they had last seen LRH, because this was where he worked, and they said 81, early 81, over a year before. They hadn't seen him since, and they had no sign or sight of him at all. So I didn't stay there. I only stayed there 4 days. I went back to Los Angeles, back to the AO, did my OT levels, which was fantastic. Now, there are facts and there is opinion, right? And fact and opinion are very different to each other. Now, all these things I've talked about so far are fact. Now I'm going to give you an opinion. My opinion is that LRH actually died. April 82. There's a lot of evidence to say that this happened. There's no proof. Bill Robertson considers he died at that time, and I have found other evidence to hint that he died at that time, but I'm not saying he did die at that time. Right? But this is my opinion. Right? Is that clear? Clear? Opinion. But it would make sense that if he died then, this would be allowing all the drama that happened almost immediately after that time. Because in June and July of 1982, let's look at my notes here a little bit. Who knows what happened in terms of church history in June, July 82? A bit louder? One at a time, sorry. Hands up. Yes. No, that was a year later. Hang on. No.
Mary Sue.
Lots of things were happening. I think most of you are a little bit late. What was going on? This happened first. And what happened was the RTC, the Religious Technology Corporation, was being formed quietly. There was no publicity. And there were contracts and so on being signed, making David Miscavige the head of the church, etc. And if some of you, we don't have time now, but some of you want to talk to me later, I can tell you about my time when I met David Miscavige when I was out at Golden Era Studios. And that was a freaky, unpleasant experience. But talk about that later. June, July, the RTC were officially becoming the head of the Church of Scientology. But it was all very quiet. There was no noise about it. But there were some things happening on this third column which we've not mentioned yet. And this is to do with the missions. The missions, of course, were the Scientology centers, mostly in the US, but also in Europe, that were not churches of Scientology. They were privately owned, and their idea was to get new people in and get them involved. And some of these groups did very well. They had lots of public and they had lots of money. This is about the missions here. Now, I did my OT levels. Through here I did OT 1, 2, 3, and then I got onto my knots. And in August, I actually completed my knots, and from Los Angeles, I was the first person who said that I was a new, what they call new OT5. But in August, while I was having my knots, one day, 9 o'clock, I started at my first session of the day, and my auditor looked just terrible. So I said to him, I'm now the auditor, I say to him, what's wrong? And he goes, no, nothing, let's get on with the session. And I said to him, no, talk to me, what's wrong? Because I didn't want a session from someone who was really upset, because I was paying a lot of money for this. I said, what's wrong? And he said, well, we had to work all night. And I haven't had any sleep. And this was an auditor who was making maybe $400 or $500 per hour for the organisation, and he had to work all night. Now, that's crazy. I said, I'm not having auditing today, I feel great, I'm going down to the beach, right? So off I went, and he didn't have to audit me that day anyway. But that was the first sign that things were going weird, because that was insane. And so there was just insanity happening. And then I went to we heard that the missions were doing very well, hugely. And I have a photograph there. There's no way I can show it big, but I just walked down the corridor with it. Show it briefly, it's a graph, starting along the bottom and then suddenly going up about, and you can look at it later. They're holding this graph up, right? The graph started, this was one mission in the USA, and it goes along the bottom for about 6 or 7 weeks at $10,000 a week. And then suddenly it goes almost straight up across a number of weeks. Yeah. But you can look at it later, right? It's just unbelievably spectacular. And this graph is taken from a meeting I attended about the time I finished my new OT5 my notes. I had this meeting just up the street in a restaurant from the AO, and they showed this graph. And the guy explained what was going on, and it was something that one of the mission holders had actually developed by himself. And I'll just draw the graph here. It goes like this. Zoom. That's $10,000 per week. And this was $187,000 per week. Now this, I believe, is the whole missing step, because after this started happening, the RTC became out in the open and they became vicious. And they attacked the missions, they attacked all groups. I went back to Sydney in September, and the place was like a Gestapo death camp. Sydney Orb, which was really nice, was just like a Gestapo death camp, like you see in the movies and so on. And from this time on, they started declaring people and throwing them out. And by the start of 83, or actually a little bit later, early 83, all personally trained people who'd been personally trained by LRH were out. All. All the executives, all the auditors, all the course supervisors, anyone who LRH trained were out. And of course, lots of other people. This list is 650 people. And then there were several thousand more, I think, from memory now, this is opinion, 4,000 more were thrown out, declared, or left in the next year. My contract, my staff contract ended at the end of 1982, and I left, I didn't go back. It just was not right. Now someone's giving me, how long do I have?
Finished.
Well, I have to get one more point.
Yeah.
You can leave if you like, but this is really interesting. There is a statement in English and it says, once is an accident, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is on purpose. 3 times is on purpose, right? Now, Scientology was destroyed, I believe. The Scientology icon was destroyed by this RTC activity. Who has heard of Bhagwan? The orange people. Okay? So the orange people, Bhagwan, the Indian guru. He was at an ashram in India, then he was in America. I'm a personal friend of his recording engineer, the guy who followed him for 15 years all over the world recording his lectures. When he and I talked, we had the same the story. The Bhagwan group was destroyed exactly the same way, by people coming into the group, doing 1 or 2 courses, no spirituality, no theta, coming to the top, and then third-partying and destroying the top organisation and taking it over. That's 2 times. That's a coincidence. The third time, in Sydney, about 13 years ago, I met this woman, and she had been a trainer in a New Age group. Their offices were 2 blocks away from the Church of Scientology. And the time when I was supervising the courses in the church, and we were getting maybe 5, if we were lucky, 10 new people in a week from body routing and friends, they had 200 people a year coming in. No, not a year, 200 a weekend coming in for a 3-day seminar, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, 200 new people each weekend, and there was a waiting list to get on this course. And she said this guy, and she taught the courses. She was one of the teachers. And her husband was one of the 3 owners of this company that ran the courses. Each course was something like $200 US, 200 euros. So they were making a lot of money, and it was just fantastic apparently. I never saw the course because it was gone. This guy came in, one guy. He came into the course. She said he was just a guy in the course. He wasn't getting any wins from it particularly. But within 3 months, he had gone up the executive, administrative levels in that group to the top. And he caused the 3 owners to start suing each other in the Australian Supreme Court. And that group just exploded also. So 3 times is not an accident. So we're not alone in having destruction in the groups. Yes?
Ich will noch 2 weitere Beispiele. Das eine sind die Mormonen.
In those 2 other examples, one is the Mormons.
The Mormons? Yeah. Okay, we talk about that later. I'd be very interested to hear it. Yeah. Yes?
The S training went around us 7
Yes, training, running out. Okay, that's 5, that's 6. And this is not just us being attacked. Okay? So that's what I understand to happen. We've run out of time. But can you please come and talk to me about this? I sort of have quite a lot of knowledge on it that I haven't been able to say. So thank you.